We are back, and we are heading to California. While we are red hot, not the same type of hot you're going to get in California. Probably too soon for a joke. I'm sorry. It's really actually devastating what's going on in the LA area, so we're really sorry for this. Hopefully some golf, not quite in the LA area, in Palm Springs, a few hours away, can bring some positivity and excitement to the folks out there who are struggling. But we do have a fun tournament ahead, the American Express. Listen, the season's picking up. It's more of a field that we should be able to have some fun with. Obviously not all the big stars, but some bigger names. It should be a really fun draft to break down. We do have our work cut out for us because it's going to be played on 3 courses. So it's not necessarily breaking down one course that you're looking for. Spence, you especially with the course breakdown. I'm looking forward to what you come up with. Outside of that, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. A little controversy from last week, and the audience would not know this answer, but drafted Michael Thorbjornsen on the show. I wrote you guys probably about 30 minutes before the start of the tournament and said, we haven't started yet. There hasn't been a lineup lock. Can I remove Thorbjornsen and get Harry Hall into my build? Harry Hall works himself up the leaderboard, ends up giving me the first place results. So I apologize, Joel, because Joel came in second. But I will say, Joel, this is something moving forward that I think that you can really try to adapt with your own lineups when people withdraw. You just have to be on the same page as a lot of these players and be able to tell them, like, if you're not going to play, remove yourself from the tournament before. Give me a fighting chance to get them out of the build. And in a lot of ways, I feel like my team was in prime early season form to be able to have that happen this week, or last week, I should say.
You did make a good decision on the swap. So you got to get some credit, but the entire week is under protest. Everyone knows, I really won the tournament. The swap shouldn't have been legitimate. Gave you the win. You still come out. You get to pick the draft order tonight. But it's all under protest. David, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. Extremely controversial last week. Obviously, Spence getting the WD just before tournament start. And look, yeah, I just have to pass on, I guess, what Spence said there, Joel. Just get better at messaging your players and tell them to withdraw at the optimum time rather than after hitting the first tee shot. Great show for us last week. I hit 66-1 first round leader Tom Hoagie given out on the show. Another nice hit on the first round leader bets. That was all free, so make sure you always stick around to the end of the Draftcast. Unfortunately, we won't have first round leaders to this week because we're in course rotation season, as I dub it, here at the Amex, and there's 3 different courses to choose from, so we don't necessarily get first round leaders here, but definitely some sharp plays. I took Nick Taylor with my final pick in the Draftcast last week. Very actually kind of miffed that I missed him on my betting card. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was his odds moved from opening at 110 into 80 to 1, and a reduction of more than 20% in terms of the win odds was just too much for me to stomach leading into the tournament. But as I highlighted on the show last week, I thought his century looked better than it did on paper. If you just looked at the headline result, he finished 48th, but he actually improved over the weekend, shooting a 66 and a 69 over the Saturday and Sunday, and he arrived at the second most stickiest course on the PGA Tour in terms of course history. His last 3 events there, he'd finished 11th, 7th, 7th, and the guy's unreal when he gets in contention. I mean, he's on 5 occasions been 8th or better entering the final round. 4 of those have now turned into victories, and one of them he finished second. I mean, if there's any guy that you want on your board, on your betting board, on your DFS lineup, if he is going to be in contention, it's probably Nick Taylor at this moment.
Nick Taylor. If there's any guys that you want, it is Nick Taylor. That before this week was probably never said before, but this week changed, and there you have it. And he is. He's playing great. It's very accurate as of now. Spence, you got your work cut out for you here with this course breakdown. What are you looking for in Palm Springs?
Yeah, you talked about this, Joel, already. You get a 3-course rotation. So you're going to get the PGA West Stadium course, La Quinta, the Nicklaus Tournament track. Players are going to play on that between Thursday to Saturday. It's highlighted by this abnormal 54-hole cut. You get this pro-am nature that comes into play. And then from there, the top 65 players in ties after Saturday make it to Sunday, and they'll head back to the PGA West Stadium course. At least we know at the end of the day here that 2 of your rounds are going to be played on that course. That does help a little bit to be able to build a model, but the bigger concern comes into play with this removal of a stat tracker elsewhere. You're kind of flying blind when a golfer tees it up at those locations. One positive thing I will say to that is these courses, when you try to measure them up together, do have some similarities. I want to keep the PGA West Stadium course aside for 1 second because there are some noteworthy things that I'd like to talk about on this show. But if you're playing Showdown or you're looking at anything in that concept in that area, these are the average scores per day of all 3 tracks. I think that this is a noteworthy answer. And, there's no first round leader bets out. We'll discuss that at the end. But if you do, for some reason, find a book that releases all of these players together, PGA West is usually an average of 1.98 strokes under par. Nicholas is 2.55 strokes under par. And then La Quinta gets to 2.86. You look at all 3 of these tracks, you get these short par 72s. The name of the game on pretty much all of those properties are deliver on the par 5s, maintain your ground on the par 3s. There are other concerns that are going to come into play that we'll discuss throughout the show. But the one thing I do want to mention on the PGA West Stadium course is that you have new greens and new bunkers at the facility. I do think that's going to likely harden the course, and it may end up further enhancing the difficulty from those numbers I just talked about. I don't know how much we're going to deviate away from those totals, but if all of a sudden it's a shot more difficult on average than those other 2 properties, at least for Showdown purposes, that would almost remove it entirely from the mix. So you're going to need to be able to avoid water out here. You're going to be able to need a lot of different facets of your game. The one note, though, I feel like, Joel, you and I specifically being on this show, as long as we have together, with John Rahm making the comment of this being a bullshit putting contest, might have added a couple extra expletives in there. The one interesting note that I noticed is, well, yes, you do need to make putts out here to win. That is the understatement of the century when the winning scores get into sometimes 30 under par. There were massive increases in expectation when it came to strokes gained approach, sometimes as much as 40 to 45% of the total impact of who ended up working themselves up the leaderboard. So for me, I overweighed my model with approach metrics, much more so than most of the rest of the public did. And that's kind of how I tried to get myself different for this event.
I love it. You got to find a way to differentiate, find an advantage on the course. One thing that I found weird or strange, and I wonder if you guys have any insight on this, is the name of so when you look online, right, it says the Pete Dye Stadium course. Is that one of the courses? Is that how they're naming like the trio? What is the nomenclature for this tournament? Is it just, I know Pete Dye Design, but is it actually the name of the course?
There's what that course is the same as PGA West Stadium course, Pete Dye Stadium course. They changed the name, and depending on what site, you're going to find lots of different names. So there's one thing to be really cognizant of. I'd reiterate Spencer's point. I think the traditional logic has been, especially in like DFS showdown contests, target those players who are on the Nicholas course and the La Quinta course rather than the stadium. However, what I've started to see in my numbers, and Spence, I'd be interested if yours line up with this as well, is that the stadium course has been consistently getting a bit easier. Now, there have been some renovations there. There's a couple of new bunkers in. It doesn't look all that substantial, but it's only looking like 1 stroke less now per round compared to La Quinta and Nicholas in the last couple of years, which, Spence, if you're nodding, I'm assuming means you're getting the same numbers. So really interesting for me in that regard is we're always looking for leverage, right, when it comes down to showdown DFS. Can you get players at lower ownership than other players who can get you to the top of the leaderboard? And really with those prizes at the top of those DFS contests, you want to be at the top because otherwise there's kind of actually no point in entering the lineup if you're just looking for a min cash every week. You need to be going for those big prizes. So could be interesting is if that traditional logic does remain, everyone's playing guys in La Quinta, everyone's playing guys at Nicholas, actually throwing in a couple of those stadium course guys who now it looks like is playing a bit easier, may find themselves way down on ownership, especially in those showdown DFS contests. But yeah, reiterate everything said. Winning score typically minus 25, minus 30, something in that range. It's an absolute putting birdie fest, really, really volatile. So be prepared to leave plenty of money on the table because there's no reason that you shouldn't. We've seen an average winning odds here of 175 to 1. So look for other desert low-scoring golf courses as good comps, which I'll mention a few as we go through the draft.
I just want to add one thing really quickly before we move on, and it does change from a game theory perspective a little bit, even if we're talking about the entire outlook of this event. As I noted, it's a 54-hole cut this week, so all players that are going to play are guaranteed 54 holes. I think that's something that's at least interesting to note here as we're trying to figure out, because David talked about it, there is extreme volatility to this course. You have cuts that sometimes trend into that double-digit sort of under par range. And I think the thing that David talked about with leverage, like that is the name of the game every single week when you play DraftKings. You're always trying to find leverage. Be very cognizant of what happens on day one at that Pete Dye Stadium course, because if those greens end up being really, really bouncy, and I've seen that already put in the chat, then there may be a different discussion to be had if that track is playing difficult. But there had been a trend where David is correct that over the last couple of years, that deviation between all those courses started to get closer and closer. My biggest concern to that would be, though, that they may be trying to remove some of that, and this will play more difficult. So go through. There will be a lot of content providers. I'm sure I will put it on Twitter at some point. We'll run through the numbers of where each person performed on the courses and see if there was that sort of a gap. Because if there's not, that round 2 situation may be a very optimal opportunity to then get some of those stadium course players into builds.
It's a great point. And, the 3-day, well, there still is a cut, right? Getting guaranteed 3 days is different, right? It probably does allow for a little bit more volatility and risk to take on because you're guaranteed that 3rd day. So keep that in mind. But we do have a draft ahead of us tonight as David brings up the draft board. A quick reminder, in case you're new to the show tonight, be sure to log in on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, you can comment and draft along with us. You will be on team audience. The way it works is like a typical fantasy football draft. It's a snake draft. Spencer, because he won, will be picking first. He chose the order. Audience will be going second. I will be third. David will be fourth. So with the 4th pick, David will also get the first pick in the second round, and we'll go back. That's how a snake works. The big caveat here is you do need to stay within a DraftKings salary. So you cannot just take all the best players. You do need to make sure you can actually afford each pick that you take as we go. Spence, without further ado, you are on the clock.
I gave myself the number 1 pick here. I think in some ways David's spot or even Joel's spot might provide a little bit more of what I was hoping for this to land, but I've always said this. If I win, I just give myself the number 1 pick and try to figure things out from there. With that, I assume I'm losing one of the 2 players. And I think this other player is probably going to go off the board very quickly, unfortunately. If he doesn't, we'll have a conversation about him when it gets back to my pick. But a lot of interesting things happen with this tournament when Xander removed himself from it. You're going to see ownership that's going to now really flock into the Thomas, Sungjae, Burns range. I think that there's a very high likelihood chance that might end up being the 3 highest owned players. If not, they're going to be very close. I am, for the sake of this, just with the way pricing has come out, I am going to take one of those 3 names just because I think it makes this build a lot easier for what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm going to take Justin Thomas here at $10,400. Not necessarily the start that he wanted to his season at the Century. If you've heard from Thomas this year, he has massive aspirations to have a Scotty Scheffler sort of a season, and he didn't necessarily start it that way at the Century, but it's a great course for him. 3rd place last season. The metrics, as I've talked about for the last couple of months, continues to trend in this direction for him. And if we're talking about elite iron players and elite players that can take advantage, specifically here, if these greens end up being hard at the PGA West course, this is an elite iron player that can really work himself up the leaderboard. So I'm going to take Justin Thomas here, regretfully losing the other player that I assume will be off the board in the next couple picks.
All right, Justin Thomas. Now, let me ask you, before I move on, audience, you are on the clock. It looks like some nominations are in. We'll need that double. I look forward to it. See you in the chat. See you. Welcome to the show. Appreciate it as always. Hopefully, you can help the audience draft this team as well. Spence, question for you. Do you think there's a possibility that Justin Thomas can come through with a Scotty Scheffler-esque season this year?
I mean, anything's possible, Joel. Like, from a statistical perspective, we're not quite there. When you look at the metrics, and it's one of the things that I kept saying about Xander, when Xander was not winning is that when you look at it from a data perspective, the numbers were elite. He was not as far behind Scotty as the perception was in the public. And then at some point it came together and he won himself 2 majors. Thomas is not quite there right now with the stats, but like we know that he's one of the streakier golfers on tour. At any moment, if he starts putting the pieces together and we see this turnaround, he has the upside and the skill set to potentially get himself back into that range. I don't think we're currently there right now. Although I will say that these are the kind of events where you start pushing the chips back in that direction if you can pull an early one out here in California.
I think it's a good point. I don't think a Scotty Scheffler season's in the realm of possibilities for Justin Thomas. I do think a throwback year where has a great year and he's one of the top 5 or 10 players on tour is realistic, and I think he could have a great season. But the Scotty Scheffler season, I mean, he had Scotty's coming off a year where he was, people started talking about him with Tiger almost, with one of the best years ever. So I don't think that is in the realm of possibilities, but I do think he can have a bounce back, really strong performance this year, which, as you said, the upside is there with JT. Audience, is the pick in? Oh, it is. Oh, see the pick is in. It's confusing because the original nomination is technically I'm with an apostrophe. I wasn't sure if that was an actual nomination or not, but yes, it is Sung Jae In, which is a really good pick. Someone I was definitely on my radar. I was considering taking here too. So I think it's a good start for the audience. We saw Sung Jae look great last week in this field. He's definitely an elite talent. So it's a great pick there by the audience. David, I'd love to hear from you. Is Sung Jae on your radar for this week?
Yeah, he would have been one of my 2 first selections off the board, which makes my lineup very, very tricky to build in terms of the way that I really wanted to construct this lineup. Just to touch on the Justin Thomas conversation there, I think near on impossible he has a season like Scotty Scheffler because it statistically has been a season only ever bettered by Tiger Woods and Vijay Singh on 2 occasions, was like there or thereabouts in terms of similarities. But I do have one futures bet, which I'll give out now. And this is another great reason to be in the Win Daily Sports Premium Discord because we identify value like this. It does look like Justin Thomas's turn to corner is really, really ramping up well. We got him at 50-1 to win the Masters at the end of last year. That number is all gone, so you won't find it anymore. And it's the only future bet that we currently have. I do see that the Masters is potentially in Justin Thomas's career at some point, and at 50-1, I thought he was fabulous value for to win at Augusta this year.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, David. I was trying to figure out what the best price for him for the Masters would be, and I think it's 30-1 right now is the best I saw in the market. You might be able to find a slow moving book somewhere, but 50-1 is a really intriguing number for a golfer that I agree with you. It would be very likely that in his career he dons the green jacket at some point.
All right, there you have it. All right, for my first pick here, I was kind of left with the last of the elite picks that you can take here. There's another 2 guys that I would consider here, but for me, in this, I think there is kind of a top 3 that you really want to consider, and so I'm not going to let the third one slip away. I'm going to go ahead and take Sam Burns, who should be a very good course fit in this field, tends to play well in these desert-like courses. His form is everything you would want. He even comes in a few hundred cheaper than Thomas and Sung Jae. I think there's a lot to like about Burns this week in this tournament. I think the only maybe not positive thing to say is he's going to come with a very high ownership number. So you're going to still make a little bit of ownership with Burns this week, but as long as you get different somewhere else, I think that is totally fine. David, you got 2 here, but would love your take on Burns as well.
So if Sung Jae was probably a steal, Sam Burns was definitely a steal. Sam Burns was going to be my first pick, and then it was whether I went with Sung Jae with my second one. Look, I understand maybe some tentativeness around Sam Burns. He probably hasn't won as much as he should have over the course of the last few years, but I think that we've really started to see him turn a corner. He's finished no worse than 14th since July of last year, came back with an 8th at the Century to start the season, and that also came off the back of a first round 72 on a course that was playing like on average like 5 under par on a daily basis. So he really, really played extremely well. over the Friday, Saturday, Sunday. As you mentioned, Rives is a course that he's played well at across his career. He's finished 18th, 6th, missed cut, 11th, 6th at this tournament over the previous, on all 5 of his appearances. Missed the cut once, and other than that, no worse than 18th, which was his first appearance. As volatile as a contest as this is, that's kind of superb course history in an event that really can be extremely volatile. So that would have been the first pick. Forces me to scramble here a little bit because literally my last 2 selections would have been picks 1 and 2 for me. So I'm going to go down and do the opposite to you guys, because I often find that's the way to counteract what you guys have just done to me, is go down the board, grab some value, hopefully identify some guys that you guys might have taken, and then go back up and grab the guy at the top that I want. So I'm going to start by taking Vince Whaley at 6,800. Now, the 72 last week at the Sony Open, I think you can cross a line through. I don't really think it was his best course fit in terms of a driver that's very long off the tee and not very accurate on a course that is pretty niggly and fiddly with tree-lined fairways. That was largely due to a 75 in the 3rd round. His other 3 rounds were in the 60s. But when I went back through a few of these results at different golf courses, some of them that I were targeting were things like TPC Dare Run, TPC Craig Ranch, low-scoring putting contests, especially Craig Ranch being a desert-style course as well, TPC Scottsdale, TPC Summerlin in Las Vegas as well with you, Spence. And particularly Summerlin for Vince Whaley, the last 2 editions of that tournament, he's finished 13th and 16th on the last 2 occasions, played here 4 times, made the cut 3. And as I said, I think that performance at the Sony Open, you can maybe put a bit of a line through with some rust, and the fact it really was kind of one round that really put his chances to bed. He didn't make the cut. It was just that 3rd round that really let him down. For that, he'd finished 5th and 8th in his last prior to start. So I think he's really, really good value for a golfer who has got tons of driving distance, but critically is really good around the greens and really good putting, which we know is going to be essential this week. I'm going to go and pair him with a DP World Tour player getting his 2nd start, and I'm pretty excited about this one for multiple reasons. One, at the moment, he's shown projected at 3% ownership. Another is that he's just finished 10th at a PGA Tour tournament on a golf course that does not suit his game, and that's Jesper Svensson. Extremely long driver of the golf ball, great putter, great around the greens. As I said, just finished 10th last week at the Sony Open. That is not a golf course that suits his game. He prefers longer, strong driving golf courses. And if we go back through his history over the past year in the DP World Tour, the reason why he managed to graduate up to the PGA Tour and earn one of those top 10 spots was his performance on strong driving golf courses. So we look at 2nd at Bahrain Championship, nice correlation in terms of generally a pretty easy golf course that rewards long driving, and if played in the desert. He won at the Singapore Classic, another long driving golf course. 2nd at the Czech Masters, another long driving golf course, and then 7th again in the desert at the DP World Tour Championship, their strongest season field of the season, their season-ending event on the 17th of November. So only a couple of months ago, finished 7th there and played with the likes of Rory McIlroy. So I think he's, again, tremendous value of a guy who can go low, who has the driving distance to tackle those par 5s, which I think is key this week, especially on the Nicklaus course. And La Quinta driving distance is a real asset.
All right, there you have it. 2 value picks in, getting an edge on the value plays. Plenty of salary to go. Going to be a strategic draft here. Before I get into my pick, Spence, would love to get your take on both Vince Whaley and Jesper Svensson.
I like both picks from David, and I think what he said that makes the most sense. Like, forget the selections for 1 second, just as the overarching theme to this. It's the zigging while other people zag. It's if you ever find yourself, this is even for the audience here, if you ever find yourself in a position in these drafts to where I would agree, and I'm sure David would say this himself, he got put in a very awkward position when the draft starts, and whether he wanted Thomas or not with it, when it starts the big 3 names on the tournament board, and then now all of a sudden he finds himself in a spot to where he feels like he needs to go to the bottom. That's how you get yourself out of this and get the value down beneath that everybody would be dropping down to at some point. So I think from a game theory perspective, it's a really savvy move that David just pulled there.
All right. The move is endorsed. Speaking of savvy moves, I'm going to go with the strategy here. I'm going to try and make a steal from Spencer. Now, this is a guy who I made the claim recently that I thought this pick I'm going to pick was one of Spencer's guys. So if it is, Spencer would probably be taking him. It might not be. I could be wrong here. But I also think that Thorbjornsen's going to be a really good course fit here. I think this is a good week for him. I think it makes sense. He can get it out there, with the best of them. We know that. He's in really good form. We saw that. He's only 7,200. He's really cheap. What I really like is there's a lot of guys around him in that same price that are getting higher ownership. I mean, just looking at the immediate guys in the same price range, from what I'm seeing, Glover has higher ownership, Michael Kim, Andrew Putnam. So they get the lower owned of the bunch on a guy who, has been performing, relatively well as of recent. I think he's going to be a pretty good course fit here. He certainly can bomb it out there with the best of them. I'm going to kind of take a page out of David's book here, get a value play off the board, or an impossible steal from Spencer. Audience, you're on the clock. It looks like the pick is in. Great job, Spencer. Did you have any interest in Thorbjornsen this week?
Well, here's what I like a lot about him. My model likes him once again, and I drafted him on the show last week. He pulls out of the tournament. He pulled out because of an illness. That's clearly a lot better than an injury, and because of that happening, we're now looking at a Thorbjornsen that's going to probably be sub 5%. So if you want to talk about slate-breaking upside of somebody that can actually put the pieces together at lower ownership than what it should be, that's what Thorbjornsen possesses. You're going to have a conversation with him, Joel, and like I did, and make sure that he doesn't pull out in the middle of the tournament. But I think there's a lot of upside to be had with him this week.
Yeah, and I think the question is, he was sick last week. If it was sickness, I'm not concerned. If it's his knee injury, that's a bigger concern. If it's the knee that caused him to withdraw, then I would definitely have more second thoughts. But if it was just sick and he's healthy now, then I wouldn't have any issues playing him.
I mean, it's just so typical Joel, right? As he just gets so excited as soon as a player's withdrawn, he's like, I must have that golfer on his team. As Sia said, Thor with consecutive WDs thanks to that pick. It's like, Joel is just a sucker for punishment. He hears that a golfer's withdrawn, he's like, I am drafting that player.
Well, listen, it's going to come with low ownership, so we got that advantage. Maybe he doesn't withdraw. But you're right. He likely will. So there goes that for me. But audience, great job getting the pick in on time. Dunlap, lock it in. Listen, we know he likes this course. I mean, he won here last year. This is certainly an up-and-comer on tour. Certainly, obviously, a course fit playing well. I like the Dunlap pick a lot. 8,500. I think that's a really solid pick. Spence, we'd love your take on Nick Dunlap, and then you got two.
I like the Dunlap pick also. This is a golfer for me, and I kind of widely note this if you ever read any of my work, where I am much lower on him than consensus. I always feel like he gets overplayed in a lot of spots, and there's not a lot of these tournaments, my model thinks that he's highly owned with less upside than what you actually have, and the safety is 0. I think here for this tournament, like we've seen it in the past, I understand that, but I see 11% ownership right now. That seems lower than what I would have thought it would have been. And the totals for me, as I said, had him inside the top 15. So I like the Dunlap pick, but I will say I am enthusiastic that this player fell back to me because I considered him at the 101. I'm probably going to make the best pick of the tournament here at the 204. And I'm going to follow it by what very well may be the worst pick of the tournament at the 301. So we'll even this out before this is all said and done. But I'm going to take Kurt Kitayama. I talk every single week about profiles of golfers that most closely resemble past winners. Kurt Kitayama was the number 1 player in my model when I looked at that. A ball striker through and through. I got him at 55-1 when it opened. DataGolf did a lot to push that number in a direction now that he might be 25, 28, 30-1 at some of those books. I would make the argument that I do think he's a top 6 or 7 win equity candidate. That's where my model has it. So I think this is just an underpricing here from Kitayama where he's going to be popular. I still question how popular we're going to actually get at the end of the day, because if you look at any of the betting markets, you would expect this to be 40%. I'm seeing more in the 16% range right now, which I think is completely fair. So I'm going to start with Kurt Kitayama. And then I'm going to transfer to a guy that I don't know if I've ever gotten him correct on the show. And that's part of the problem with this selection. But think of desert golfers that kind of find success at these total driving facilities when they're able to use that iron play. I've talked about that quite frequently of the profile of what I'm looking at. And this is a golfer that has 2 top 22 finishes the last 2 times he's played this tournament. Did come at 30th place at the Sony. If you look before that, it's a bunch of missed cuts. But I'm going to go back down one more time with the Keith Mitchell ship. I think Mitchell has immense upside for this tournament. I see 7% ownership right now. It's always a roller coaster with him at the end of the day. But when a golfer like him can use his actual ball striking acumen, that is where I like him the best. So some of the upside numbers for me just loved Keith Mitchell's potential.
Boom, Keith Mitchell. And for the record, for what it's worth, Kitayama ended up being the number 1 player in my model as well. I didn't put as much weight to that. I wasn't overly playing him, but the way it bared out, the way obviously, he matches up to this course well, and that's why the metrics are kind of showing that. But I agree. There's certainly upside there. So I like that pick. David, before I go, I'd love to get your take. Are Kitayama and Keith Mitchell on your radar this week?
Yeah, look, I said Nick Taylor's one of the clutchest golfers on the PGA Tour, perhaps the world at the moment, which I stand by. I mean, his results just speak for itself since 2025 appearances, 4 wins, and a second from 5 times starting the final round in the top 8. But Kitayama also has that ability. We saw it at the Arnold Palmer Invitational when he won an extremely tough field, and we were on him that week at something like 70-1, I believe. And part of that came from the fact that when he has been in contention on the DPL Tour, he kind of hasn't shied away from competing with some of those big names. This is a surprisingly strong field for me, despite the withdrawal of Xander Schauffele and Scotty Scheffler at the top, for no reason given, the other because he decided to grab a drinking glass too hard at Christmas Day and put some glass into his hand. So despite that, it's a pretty strong field, and Kitayama does look like definite value. Really good desert golf results over on the DPL Tour as well. Finished 6th of the Dubai Desert Classic, which is on this week. I've got my Dubai Desert Classic hat on because it's the golf course that I used to play at, Emirates Golf Club, on the shirt there as well. One near and dear to my heart, literally and figuratively this week. So he's got great results there. We know that he can go and score low, and he's got the ability to make equals at any time. I do agree. He does look like he potentially is going to get a little bit higher owned within that range, but you're kind of offsetting that with Keith Mitchell as a way to differentiate yourself there, Spence, and a golfer as well who, if he can get back to his normal ball striking baseline, has the ability to go out there and play very well. My issue maybe comes in a putting contest. Does he have the ability to go out and really spike with the putter? But I'll temper that conversation because I'm going to take a golfer who traditionally has been regarded as a really bad putter within his career.
Boom. All right. There you have it. Audience, another great job. Super speedy this year. Audience, great job. You're the real MVP of this show. Pick is in. Davis Thompson, 8,900. Another pick I like. I think the audience is off to a solid draft here. Spence, I'd love to get your feedback on the Davis Thompson pick.
I mean, he's an elite ball striker that plays these sorts of courses well historically. I will say this, I'm kind of indifferent one way or another. I think he's highly owned for all those answers. If you're directly comparing him here and at the Sony, I was very low on him, so much so early in the week. I kind of changed my stance later on. Not that I necessarily got him into builds, but I softened up to him a little bit. He ends up missing the cut at the Sony. I do think he's a better fit here than what we got last week, but I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a little indifferent. I don't know if David wants to say something about him. Maybe he has a different opinion than I do.
I mean, look, I was on him last week actually at the Sony Open, and only just missed the cut, right? I think it was right on the number, just a couple of bad holes coming in that really kind of cost him a trip to the weekend. The concern for me now comes that he started the Century and the Sony Open losing strokes on approach in both starts. And in 2024, that was really what was driving his good play along with his driver. It was his ball striking, right? Because he's not necessarily the greatest putter on planet Earth. But he was really strong with the driver and his approach play was excellent. And the fact that we now have back-to-back starts with the approach play diminishing, I'm now kind of on a wait and see for Davis Thompson. in saying that, and it was mentioned in the chat here, he won the John Deere Classic, another long-scoring course, which I think is pretty analogous to what you're going to get at the Amex. He was 5th at the Shriners. He had a 15th at the Phoenix Open in the signature event. He finished 2nd here previously. So he has got kind of a record of performing on these low-scoring desert golf courses, which obviously could correlate well. So potentially, we end up with that flip where I tip a guy the week before, he goes and wins the next week. We've seen that happen on multiple occasions. And also a case where people don't want to play him because they got burned last week with a miscut, and suddenly he comes in at lower leverage opportunity with lower ownership and goes out and plays well.
I'll keep this very quickly. We'll move across the show. I don't want these picks to take as long as they have. Like, to Zach's point of it, yes, I love Killer Keith. Like, that's an addiction. That's something that it's like, don't do as I say with that. I think for Thompson, as David just said, it comes down to ownership at the end of the day, because you're not getting a price discount at $8,900 from what we just got. So if it's low ownership and you want to take a shot with it, that is okay. If it ends up being 15% plus ownership because everybody wants to play him because of how he plays similar courses, that is my only concern. I don't have a strong take one way or another, which is kind of where I'm at, but it's just an ownership game at the end of the day.
All right. Great insight. We'll keep this draft moving. Speaking of my guys, I think I'm developing a new one here. It might be my 2025 guy. We'll have drafted him 2 weeks in a row. Nicholas Echeverria. Now, he guy's playing great. Guy looks great. He's in great form. I kind of thought they didn't really adjust his price enough. It's still in the 7K range, 7.9, so close to 8. But the way he's playing, I thought he could have been in the high 8 range or even at least the mid 8s. Second place at the Sony. I think he should be a really good course fit. We're talking about how he shook out on the model he made. He was second after Kitayama on mine. So I think there's a lot to like about Nico this year moving forward, but especially this week as well. David, you got two. Love your take on Nico, and then who are you taking for your next two picks?
Yeah, I think Echeverria is a fine play again. I think you can go back to the well on that one this week. The really interesting thing, right, is towards the end of last year, he adopted a claw putting grip, which we also later saw Scotty Scheffler deploy to good effect at the Hero Open when he won the year for us. Go on to DataGolf and have a look at Nicholas Echeverria's DataGolf page. And you can literally see in the stats when he adopted the new putting grip, and you can see the gain strokes putting almost immediately on his profile. So he's kind of a different golfer. And the fact that he's had previously no real results at other desert courses, he had no real results anywhere if we look at the facts, right? And the fact that now he's adopted this new putting claw grip, we've seen it come through in the stats easily, and he's getting those approach metrics, ball striking metrics. He's definitely a change golfer, so I think he's a good value there at 7,900. I'm going to go and grab some guys at the top of the board because I basically need to. I'm going to go and take Patrick Cantlay here. I think Cantlay's been getting a really hard time of late because of his inability to basically win again, kind of similar to my conversation on Sam Burns. Definitely should have won more golf tournaments than the guy has, but the fact remains that in his last 8 tournaments, he's finished worse than 17th only once in all of those starts. 15th at the Century. Again, I thought he played a lot better than that perhaps even looked. 15th isn't a bad result, but he opened with a 74. Like on a golf course that was playing 5 under par. He was basically losing 6-7 strokes in his very first round. And we tipped him that week. Other than that round, he played brilliant. He shot 64, 65, 68. Had he done that for 4 rounds, he would have been right there in contention. And he's got a superb record on not only this set of courses, but on other desert courses as well. He finished 9th here, 2nd, 9th, 26th in his first 4 starts here, 52nd last year, not much to write home about. At TPC Scottsdale, he's finished 2nd. He's won at TPC Summerlin, followed by a 2nd, an 8th, and a 2nd. So incredible desert golf form at the TPC Summerlin in Las Vegas. So I think he can go play well, and potentially you're getting a bit of a discount in terms of his salary and potentially in terms of ownership compared to Sam Burns, Sung Jae Lim, Justin Thomas above him, who are definitely going to be higher owned. So he'll be my first selection on this wraparound. Then I'm going to go and take a golfer on the comeback. And as I said, I am planning to draft a golfer who is typically being regarded as a very poor putter, and that's Will Zalatoris. So I'll take him here. he has begun, much like Echeverria, to look like he's beginning to turn a corner with his putter. His last 5 starts, he's gained putting in 4 of them. It looks like the injury is getting a lot better and his recovery has been a lot better. But kind of as a result of that, I think he's at a lower ownership than he should be, sort of middle of that range within the 8Ks. And I feel that he's a really good value this week at a tournament where his ball striking can really come through, his driver can really come through for him. And the fact he's now improving the putter, he's potentially value in both betting markets and DFS. So played here 3 times, never finished worse than 36, finished 6th here on debut, 5th at TPC Summerlin, set a 17th at both the Phoenix Open and at the Byron Nelson at TPC Craig Ranch. So definitely looks like he enjoys his desert golf and a golfer that can maybe be a little bit early on.
Boom. All right, there you have it. Zalatoris. Haven't heard his name in a while. I think he certainly could be a sneaky player at 8,400. I like that pick. Spence, we'd love to hear from you. Are Cantlay and Zalatoris on your radar this week?
I'm curious to see where Cantlay's ownership ends up landing. I think David made a lot of astute points to this. If you look specifically, you want to find desert golf correlations and you want to go to my neck of the woods and talk about TPC Summerlin. That's about as good of course history as you're going to find from any golfer. Kind of carries that over through California. Like there was a point of Cantlay's career where him in California was almost just an autoplay. And for whatever the reason is, maybe it's the lack of upside that he has shown recently. It does feel like the industry's gotten off of him a little bit. Do think we might push back into this direction right now where people are going to play him again. I think he's certainly in play. It is a selection that is worthy to be discussed. And then as far as Zalatoris, massive upside for the price there at 8,400.
All right, there you have it. Lock it in. I'm contemplating a different strategy here. I'm going to try something a little different, and we'll see how this team ends up by doing so. And with that, I'm going to start by taking Wyndham Clark.
Oh my God!
Is that a steal?
Mm-hmm.
All right, Wyndham Clark.
Yep.
There's no question.
Both of us.
Well, good. I wasn't sure if you guys were going to be on him. I was surprised he did last this long. But there's no question. I mean, he's a top, 5 to 6 talent in this field for sure. He looked good last week. The one thing you're going to, look at with him or with a magnifying glass are the approach metrics. But he's shown when he hits those approach irons well, he tops 10s the tournament. And so the way he putted, the way he's hitting that driver, everything's looking good. I think he has a good week with his irons this week and he gets you a really good result. And for him, I would consider a pretty watered down field. My only real concern is he does tend to play up to the bigger tournaments, and this certainly wouldn't be considered that. So if you're thinking of Clark as a guy who plays up to these bigger, more prestigious tournaments, this certainly isn't that. But I'm just going to bet on the skill and the talent here at 9,400 in a field where he is certainly one of the elevated talents. Audience, pick is locked in. Great job. Super speedy. Grazerman. He's been playing great. 9,200. I think there's some other guys I'd be looking at in that range for me personally. But I can get behind you guys taking them and playing him because he certainly does justify it with his upside. Spence, you got 2 following the audience. We'd love to get your take on Grazerman. And then who are you following that up with your next 2 picks?
I might get burnt from this comment of Max Grazerman. This is certainly one of those golfers that possesses, at least recently, a very high ceiling. There were a couple of things I noticed. Part of it comes from a statistical perspective. Part of it comes down to a very nuanced sort of a factor that there's really not a way to correctly weigh it, but I'm just going to at least throw it out there into the space here. So if you look at the recent approach metrics, they've been horrible from him. It's been all from the putter. That's certainly something that he can continue. I think Nicholas and La Quinta are 2 places where that trends well for him. I worry a little bit at the stadium course with these bouncier greens if he can put it together. At a lot of ownership at the end of the day, that's one thing. The other thing that really is not quantifiable, take it for what it's worth. If you look at who these players have, it's a Pro-Am tournament at the end of the day. He drew Kevin Streelman. I don't know if that's necessarily the most ideal partner that I'd want to play with. Like, if I'm a player like him that is viewed as an elite name in a tournament, I would rather have an elite name next to me so I'm not worried about whatever Kevin Streelman puts together. I know Kevin Streelman in desert golf has been good historically, and maybe if he puts that together, that's something, but that's like an outside of the box narrative that at least I noticed when I was looking at it. So I think he's relatively safe. I don't know if for an upside perspective, that's the route I'm going to technically go down. There's other players I would rather have. Like I would rather take Wyndham Clark and bet on Wyndham Clark's upside at half the ownership. That's kind of essentially how I am making my builds this week. But Joel, with you taking Wyndham Clark out of the player pool, unfortunately, it was going to be some combination of me of, and I'll just name the names here because it doesn't necessarily alter anything I can do. It was going to be Wyndham Clark or Finau. So I'm going to take Tony Finau with this pick. Or it was going to be Mac Meisner or Daniel Berger. And Daniel Berger is kind of right up your alley, Joel. That's something that you do. But I'm not going to leave this without Mac Meisner, I guess. It just makes more sense for me with the way that I can make this build. So I'm going to go Finau and Meisner here.
There you go. Well, if it makes you feel any better, to counter steal, what I was kind of describing before was I was planning to take Clark and Finau and then figuring out some sort of punt play with my last pick, knowing I got 3 guaranteed days. They've taken that move off the table for me with your pick of Finau. I thought Finau and Clark were very similar. They're both very high upside guys. So I like that pick there. Audience, you are back on the clock with your 5th pick, so make sure you get those nominations in. David, we'd love to go to you. All right, I would love to get your take on the 3 of Meisner, Finau, and Grazerman.
Yeah, and Clark, for me, at the moment, shows the lowest ownership within that range. So I think that's really interesting just from that factor, right? Like, we know he has the ability to absolutely go and win this contest. So it's almost like a kind of tournament where within your salary range, try to just avoid the ownership and like you're probably going to work out okay. Like it is such a coin flip in terms of who's going to come out and make 25, 30 birdies, right? So someone like Wyndham Clark, I think is a really interesting option. I know that C is really high on Max Grazerman. He really loves him this week as well. So big ups to C. I always kind of trust his judgment. He's a good judge of form, definitely. And he's been playing really, really nice golf. So I kind of like Spence. I probably would have leaned towards Clark over, say, a Grazerman. But, you know, if Sia likes him, I think that there's some legitimate upside there. Tony Finau obviously looked a lot better at the Century than he has been. We know he's had some injuries lately, withdrew from the Grant Thornton towards the end of last year, grew up in Utah, played a lot of desert golf within his career and definitely has upside as well. And then Mac Meisner, a guy I have a ton of time for. I think he's going to have quite a big 2025. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes and wins a tournament.
All right, there you have it. Audience, great job locking your pick in. Peterson, Paul Peterson, off the board at 6,600. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't even know who that is. I've never heard of Paul Peterson before. Audience, I can't tell you if it's a good pick. Spence, you smiled, so do you know who it is, and do you think it's a good pick?
I like the Paul Peterson pick.
All right.
At the RSM, he came 25th. Last week, he came 10th. This is a kind of, you always have to worry about data of what it actually means over just a couple of tournaments, but he is a model darling through a couple of starts here. And I don't see a ton of ownership around him right now. I think a lot of people are viewing this to be a fluke. And if nobody wants to play him, this is certainly an opportunity, according to my model, to go back to him again.
Audience being sneaky. I love it. David, we'd love to hear from you. Is Paul Peterson on your radar?
Look, I don't know if he is at the price. He does give you a ton of leverage. I've actually, I think that his ownership probably is one of those that increases as the week goes on, because it's not the first time I've actually heard his name this week mentioned, and I think a lot of people have been possibly reading into his result last week. What we have seen in his form on the Corn Ferry Tour, he's pretty short off the tee, and he does tend to be more accurate. And that's not the worst thing on the stadium course, because as we know, Pete Dye likes to get everybody to end up playing from the exact same distance. So he kind of takes driver out of hand on his designs. But the other two courses, driving distance is definitely an asset to at least some degree. You're probably going to need an eagle or two at this tournament. Like, in your ability, if you're a bit short off the tee, to go and get those eagles isn't really there. So there's another name down in the 6K range. Just off the basis of that pick, I might end up leaving a ton of money on the table and going and taking him just to discuss that selection.
All right. Well, there you have it. I'm on the board. I'm really stuck between two different guys. So what I might do, because David could be in my same price range, so he could be taking two of these guys. I'm going to take my value play first, but that's stupid because then it's just giving David the ability to take both the guys that I want. So I should take one of them before I do that. So I'll put it out there. I'll ask everyone. I'm really deciding between Harry Hall and JJ Spawn in this spot here. David, I'll ask you. Do you have a preference?
If it helps, I'm not taking either of those guys. So okay. You can play it as you wish.
All right. Well, let me ask your opinion. Do you prefer either of them?
I probably prefer Harry Hall just because I know that JJ Spawn can get a little bit shaky with the putter, and saying that he did win the Texas Open. We were on him that week at triple figure odds. It was a huge win for us in terms of the betting markets. So he has played well in the desert previously. I just have concerns perhaps about the putter, and we kind of saw that come to light when he threw away the Sony Open in pretty dramatic fashion. In saying that, those type of things public generally overreacts to, right? Like they just go, oh, this guy threw away the tournament, so he can't possibly play well this week. And suddenly you end up getting a ton of leverage on a guy who, like, at the end of the day, finished third in a tournament that at the beginning of the week, if you said to JJ Spawn, hey, would you like to finish third at the Sony Open? He would have grabbed it with both hands.
It's a good point. And the other thing that keeps playing in my head is if this is, as John Rahm calls it, a putting contest, it should fit Harry Hall pretty well. The guys can get spiked with that putter. We've seen his ball striking really emerge as of recent. So I think there's a lot of upside here with Harry Hall. So I'm going to go ahead and lock in the Harry Hall pick. It was a close decision with Spawn, but I think Hall possesses the upside with that nuclear potential putter. All right, David, you got two to round out the squad. Plenty of money to spend. How are you going to finish this team?
Well, probably with a little bit of difficulty, to be honest, because we've just eaten up the top of the board really quite early on in the draft, and it's really forced my hand in terms of how we basically approach all of this. So I think I'm kind of left in some ways with no choice but to be incredibly different and just leave so much money on the table. It's like seems almost unreal, but bear in mind, last week the highest priced golfer on the optimal lineup was 7,500. The total salary spent was 43,000, and I don't think that's necessarily like unrealistic for something like the Amex. As I said, the average winning odds here have been 175 to 1. So if you're ever going to take a long shot, it's probably a tournament like this. I think you need to be really comfortable getting uncomfortable. Nobody in this tournament is a reliable chance to finish top 10 because it's just such a putting contest. It's such a birdie fest, as John Rahm famously said, that you can kind of go every which way with it. So the first pick I'm going to take is the really low-end guy that I was speaking about. And rather than taking Paul Peterson, I'm actually kind of intrigued by another Korn Ferry graduate called William Moe, who's a 24-year-old graduate from the Korn Ferry Tour. He had a number of top fives towards the end of the season, but as the nature of those victories for me, or those results for me and where they happened, that was really interesting. So you go through, and he finished fourth in Utah. He finished second in Kansas, then finished fifth in Chile. He finished 14th at the Knoxville Open. Then his other good results towards the end of last year were in Boise, Idaho, finished second, and then at the Children's Hospital Championship towards the end of the year, one of the playoff events, he finished second there as well. But they've tended to come in lower scoring events. They've come on desert courses. The guy has tons of driving distance, which I think is a real asset this week. And he's played one of the PGA Tour tournaments that I'm using as a guide this week once in 2023. His only PGA Tour start that year was at the John Deere Classic, and he came out and he finished 13th in another birdie contest. So a shot that I'm willing to fire at the odds and at the DFS price on offer. Now, as I said, that leaves me with a ton of money at the top. Feasibly, where I probably would have gone here would have been someone like Sungjae Im, Sam Burns, if they were on the table. Like, I'm going to transparently say that's where I would have gone. But those aren't options, so I'm going to leave perhaps a historic amount on the table for the PGA Draft Cast. I'm going to go take Ben Griffin at 7,800 and leave several $1,000s of salary right there on the table. 45th at the Sony Open. Again, I think that you can read into that in different ways. He opened with a 65 and looked really, really good in the first round before backsliding a bit, but Prior to that, he had 4 finishes of 24th or better, including 8th at Bermuda and 15th at RSM Classic. He finished 9th here last year in 2024 and 32nd in his other start. TPC Craig Ranch last year, he finished 13th. TPC Deer Run, he finished 5th. So again, he shows up in these birdie contests. He's a really good putter of the golf ball. He's pretty long, pretty straight, like does enough with the driver, I think, to get by. But it's the short game acumen that I really like, and it's the approach metrics I really like with Ben Griffin. The other thing I'll just add to finish up on him is you do see a disproportionate wedge shots, particularly with the stadium course in play. And he is very good with those lower range irons as well. So do like him here. And as I said, getting completely different by leaving 3,000 odd on the table here.
I love it. And I love, like David said, don't be bashful to leave money on the table. It makes you different. And I would be surprised if the winning lineup didn't leave a lot of money on the table, just the way that this kind of salaries are structured. So that is not something you should be shy away from. If you feel like that's your best lineup or that's what your build rolls, that's totally fine this week. I'm in another one where I'm between two. I have my pick, but I will tell you which the two guys I was between. On my last pick here, I was contemplating Matt Kuchar and Chandler Phillips. Chandler Phillips really didn't show up last week. It was a pretty bad effort, which I think is going to take a lot of people off of him on the ownership. But if you just take away just last week, he otherwise has been in really good form. And at 6,900, I think he's pretty underpriced. There's a lot of upside there with Phillips. I am going to take Kuch here. I think Kuch is the better of the two. Kuch has been a little bit more consistent. And Kuch also similarly has that hot putter upside, where if you're thinking about a putting contest, he can get hot with that putter. So I thought they were very close. I will have Chandler Phillips instead of my lineups. But for my last pick to round out this squad, I'm taking Matt Kuchar. Audience, you need your last pick here. So get those nominations in, 6,500 to spend. So you're going to need a value pick. While we wait for that last audience pick to come in, Spence, we'll go to you. We'd love to get your take on David's last two and Matt Kuchar.
So I'll add Phillips to the mix here. There are 2 categories that I ran that I found to be very impactful. Fairway birdie or better percentage. These have some of the highest fairway birdie rates if you can actually locate the short grass. And then aggression, which is what David's kind of talked about, of the ability to create eagles on these par 5s. Chandler Phillips specifically in those 2 areas, just going to throw it out there. I think it's a very volatile pick. There's not going to be a ton of ownership around him because of what he did last week. He's 2nd in fairway birdie or better percentage in this field. He's 18th in aggression. I think there's an upside to Phillips here that makes a lot of sense.
All right, there you have it. Maybe I should have gone with the Phillips pick here.
And I love the Ben Griffin pick, by the way. I love Ben Griffin every week. Like that's an every week thing with him.
So I think Ben Griffin might be becoming a Spence guy to be determined. A few more drafts to see. But audience, great job getting your last pick in. Jake Knapp, not a lot to choose from down there, but for what you had to go with, I thought it was a pretty for that range. I like the Knapp pick. I would prefer not to have to dip down that low, but I can certainly understand the pick there. Spence, is Knapp on your radar? And then you got one to round out the Draftcast.
I don't know. I mean, we are like a month removed from everybody thinking Jake Knapp was the greatest player in the world. It seemed like I saw it over and over again on Twitter, and now he's down in this price range where he's $6,300. Nobody wants to play him. I worry about the back problems that he has expressed. Like that would be the bigger concern with everything. If you're throwing a dart and there wasn't an injury, maybe. The injury concern does worry me though. I'll wrap us up though. So I talked about a golfer or golfers, if we're trying to find a profile down here in the $6,000 range of that aggression and fairway birdie or better percentage. And this is a name that has won somewhat recently, surprisingly, who now finds himself down at this price tag. Good desert golfer in general, been really bad lately. I'm going to bet on that potential there with Patton Kizzire at 6,600. I think Rio, his Satsune would have been somebody that I would have considered. I actually thought, Joel, you might go down that direction because it seems like we do every single week between one of us. But I'll take Patton Kizzire. I kind of like his upside here. I think the floor is very low. But when you get down into this section, you're kind of throwing darts to begin with. All
right. That is a wrap for the Draftcast tonight. There won't be first round leaders. So I can't tell you we're not done yet because we are done. We're going to wrap this up. But we will post these lineups. Let us know which team you think is going to win. And over the next couple of weeks, we are going to be announcing some small minor tweaks to the Draftcast this year. So we'll be tracking results that we'll share with everyone. You'll be picking your best team. So stay tuned. Turn in next week. You'll start seeing us actually post the results from each draft, who's getting what points. We'll lay out the rules and the results and who's drafting with who. We'll have some big guests coming up this year. So stay tuned for that. We're all really excited about it. Beginning of the 2025 season is off to a good start. I'm super excited for what's to come. Good luck this week. Did I forget anything?
David, you're on mute.
There we go. It always has to be one at least to start the season. I was just going to say again, Dubai Desert Classics on this week. You got Rory McIlroy versus John Rahm, some PGA versus Liv rivalry. Extremely strong field over there in Dubai. And the good news is if you're on Win Daily Sports, we cover both PGA Tour and DP World Tour every single tournament, so you're getting all of our golf betting picks and DFS advice for both of those, and especially over in Dubai this week is a huge tournament. It's, as I said, a golf course that I learned to play golf on and used to work at, so one I know quite a bit about, and a huge tournament this week. So if you haven't already, jump into the description. You can get a promo code, get 50% off your premium membership price. So it works out like $7.50 a week, as it's next to nothing, $1 a day, to have access to not just all of our golf selections, but every single sport that we cover, including NFL, NBA, MLB, pro soccer. There's just absolutely everything in there that you will need. It's the best value in all sports. So jump into that description below, grab the link and get yourself a bargain.
And of course, sports.